The Galactic Council had seen many strange things in its 10,000 years of existence. They had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. They had watched species discover faster-than-light travel for the first time. They had seen wars fought with weapons that could crack planets in half. But nothing had prepared them for what the humans brought to the battlefield. Ambassador Crixtal of the Vorn Collective stood in the observation chamber, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as he tried to understand what he was seeing on the holographic display. The images came from the surface of Nexar 7, a disputed mining world where human forces had just landed to defend their colony against Scrath raiders. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his translator implant converting his words into the common tongue used by all council species. The human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Chen, smiled in that strange way humans did when they knew something others did not. "No joke, Ambassador. What you're seeing is the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the United Earth Forces." On the screen, large 4-legged creatures ran across the rocky terrain of Nexar 7. On their backs sat human soldiers in modified space suits, carrying weapons that looked both ancient and advanced at the same time. The creatures were beautiful in a wild sort of way, with flowing hair that streamed behind them as they moved and powerful legs that ate up the ground beneath them. "Those are horses," Ambassador Chen explained. "They have been our partners in war for over 5,000 years. "But this is space warfare," Crixtal protested. "We use combat drones, we use armored vehicles, we use orbital strikes. What possible use could these primitive animals have on a modern battlefield?" Ambassador Chen's smile grew wider. "Watch!" On the screen, the Scrath raiders had set up defensive positions around the human colony. The insectoid aliens were confident in their fortifications. They had fought dozens of species across the galaxy, and all of them used the same tactics. Infantry would approach slowly, supported by vehicles and air cover. It was predictable. It was logical. It was what everyone did. The humans did not do what everyone did. The horses came over the ridge like a wave of thunder. There were 500 of them, spread out in a formation that looked chaotic but was actually carefully planned. The riders wore light armor that would not slow them down. They carried plasma lances in one hand and kinetic rifles in the other. And they screamed as they rode, a sound that the translators could not process because it was not language. It was something older, something primal. The Scrath had perhaps 30 seconds to understand what was happening before the cavalry was upon them. Their targeting systems, designed to track vehicles and infantry moving at normal speeds, could not keep up with the horses. The automated defenses fired, but the riders weaved and dodged in patterns that no computer could predict, because no computer had ever needed to account for the relationship between a human and their horse. The impact was devastating. The plasma lances burned through Scrath armor like it was paper. The riders did not stop moving, did not present stationary targets. They flowed through the defensive positions like water through broken stone, leaving chaos and destruction behind them. In the observation chamber, Ambassador Crixtal watched in silence as the battle unfolded. It was over in less than 10 minutes. The Scrath forces, which had successfully defended against conventional attacks for 3 weeks, were completely destroyed. "How is this possible?" he finally asked. Ambassador Chen looked at the screen with something like pride in her eyes. "Horses are not just animals, Ambassador. They are our oldest military technology. We have spent thousands of years breeding them, training them, learning to fight alongside them. They can feel our emotions. They can sense danger before we can. A skilled rider and their horse move as one being, thinking as one mind." "But the environmental challenges alone," Crystal said. "The atmosphere of Nexar 7 is barely breathable. The gravity is higher than Earth standard. How do the animals survive?" "We modified them," Chen said simply. "Just as we modified ourselves. Those horses have enhanced lungs, strengthened bones, and nervous systems that can handle extreme conditions. They wear environmental suits just like their riders do. It took us 50 years to perfect the process, but now we have breeds that can operate in almost any environment where humans can survive." Crystal's translator implant struggled with the concept. In his experience, and in the experience of every species he knew, war was a matter of technology. You built better weapons, better armor, better vehicles. You did not bring animals to a battlefield. Animals were inefficient. Animals were unpredictable. Animals died. "The losses," he said. "Surely you lose many horses in such attacks." Ambassador Chen's face changed. The smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. "Yes, we lose horses, we lose riders. Every cavalry charge has a cost. But Ambassador, let me ask you something. How many soldiers did the Scrath lose defending that position over the past 3 weeks against conventional attacks?" Crystal checked his records. Approximately 800 Scrath warriors were killed in the fighting. "And how many did they lose today?" "Over 2,000. "And how many humans died in the 3 weeks of conventional fighting?" Crystal checked again. 347 human soldiers. "And today?" 12 riders and, Crystal paused, 19 horses. 31 lives lost, Chen said. To end a battle that was costing hundreds of lives every week, to protect a colony of 50,000 people, to send a message to every Scrath raider in this sector that human settlements are not easy targets. She paused. "We mourn every horse that falls. They are soldiers just as much as their riders are. They have names. They have families in our stables back home. When a war horse dies in battle, we build monuments to them." The display showed the aftermath of the charge. Human soldiers were moving through the destroyed Scrath positions, checking for survivors. The horses stood nearby, some of them being tended by their riders for minor injuries. One rider sat on the ground next to a fallen horse, stroking its mane as other soldiers approached to offer comfort. "I do not understand," Crystal admitted. "This seems inefficient, illogical. Why bond so closely with creatures that will die in war?" Ambassador Chen was quiet for a moment. "Ambassador, have you ever loved something? Not in the way of political alliances or economic partnerships. I mean truly loved something, knowing that you might lose it?" Crystal considered the question. The Vorn did not form such attachments. They were a practical species, efficient, logical. I do not believe so. That is the difference between us, Chen said. Humans fight harder when we have something to love, something to protect, something to lose. Those horses are not just tools of war. They are our friends, our partners, our family. And when we ride into battle together, we are not afraid of death. We are afraid of letting each other down. The Galactic Council session ended with no formal decisions made. But as the ambassadors departed, whispers spread through the corridors of power. The humans had brought horses to space warfare, and somehow, against all logic, it was working. General Marcus Webb stood in the stable complex of the UES Thunder's Hooves, the largest cavalry transport ship in the human fleet. Around him, the sounds and smells of horses filled the air. Despite all the advanced technology that kept these animals alive in space, a stable still smelled like a stable. There was something comforting in that. "Status report, Lieutenant," he asked the young officer who had come to meet him. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo saluted smartly. "All 300 horses are healthy and ready for deployment, sir. We've received orders to proceed to the Kellic system. The colony there is requesting military assistance." Webb nodded. He had been expecting this. The Kellic's colony was small, only about 10,000 people, but it sat on one of the richest deposits of quantum crystals in the sector. The hegemony of Drath had been eyeing it for months, and diplomatic negotiations had broken down last week. "What are we facing?" he asked as they walked through the stable blocks. Horses stuck their heads out of their stalls to watch them pass, and Webb automatically reached out to pat noses and scratch ears as he went. These were his soldiers, every one of them. Intelligence suggests a Drath invasion force of approximately 5,000 troops, supported by armor and air assets. They're expected to land within the next 72 hours. Webb stopped in front of a particular stall. Inside stood a massive black stallion with a white star on his forehead. This was Thunder, the horse Webb had ridden for 15 years. They had charged together on a dozen worlds, and Thunder bore the scars to prove it. A plasma burn on his right flank, a missing piece of his left ear from a close call with kinetic fire, and in his eyes an intelligence that went beyond what any genetic modification could explain. "Hello, old friend," Webb said, offering Thunder a treat from his pocket. The horse accepted it gently, his warm breath on Webb's palm. "Looks like we're going back to work." Thunder snorted, as if to say he was ready. The trip to the Kellic system took 4 days. During that time, Webb drilled his cavalry regiment constantly. Space-based cavalry operations were different from the traditional charges of old Earth. The horses and riders practiced deploying from dropships. They ran through exercises in varied gravity and atmospheric conditions. They trained for urban combat, open field engagement, and everything in between. But the most important training happened in quiet moments, when riders spent time simply being with their horses. This was not inefficiency, despite what alien observers might think. This was the foundation of everything the cavalry did. A horse that trusted its rider completely would run through fire without hesitation. A rider who knew their horse's every mood and tendency could react to danger before either of them consciously understood what was happening. On the third day, Webb gathered his officers in the briefing room. The holographic display showed the Calyx colony and surrounding terrain. "The colony is situated in a valley," he explained. "Mountains on 3 sides, open plains to the east. The Drath will almost certainly approach from the east, where their armor can operate effectively. That's also our best ground for a charge," Captain Jonas Reyes observed. He was Webb's second-in-command, a rider whose family had been cavalry for 3 generations. "Exactly, but the colonists want us to defend the city itself. They don't understand what we do." "They'll learn," Lieutenant Okonkwo said. "They always do." Webb nodded. "Our job is not to sit behind walls and wait for the enemy to come to us. Our job is to break them before they ever reach those walls. The Drath have never faced cavalry before. They don't know what's coming." When they arrived at Calyx, the colony administrator was waiting at the landing field. Administrator Chen was a thin, nervous man who clearly had not slept in days. He looked at the horses being led out of the transport ships with obvious confusion. "General Webb, I requested military assistance. I was expecting tanks, artillery, something to help us hold the defensive positions." Webb swung up onto Thunder's back with practiced ease. The stallion danced slightly, eager to move after days of confinement. "Administrator, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never lost a colony, trust me." Over the next 2 days, Webb positioned his forces. He sent scouts out to monitor the Drath approach. He identified the ground where he wanted to fight. He talked to the colonists, explaining what was going to happen and what they needed to do. Most importantly, he let his horses run. After days in the transport ship, they needed to stretch their legs to feel solid ground beneath their hooves again. Webb rode out with them, feeling Thunder's powerful muscles working beneath him. This was what they were made for. This was what they both lived for. The Drath came on the morning of the 3rd day. Their invasion force was exactly as intelligence had predicted. 5,000 soldiers in heavy armor, supported by hover tanks and atmospheric fighters. They moved across the plains toward the colony like a slow, unstoppable tide. Administrator Chen contacted Webb on the communication system. "General, they're coming. Shouldn't you be falling back to the defensive positions?" Webb was on a ridge overlooking the plains, his cavalry spread out behind him. 300 riders on 300 horses, all of them watching the enemy approach. "Administrator, do you know why cavalry charges were abandoned on Earth?" No, I don't." "Because of machine guns. When you ride horses into machine gun fire, you die. It's simple mathematics. No amount of courage or skill can overcome sustained automatic fire from fortified positions." Webb paused, watching the Drath army. "But out here, things are different. These aliens don't use machine guns. They use energy weapons that need to be precisely aimed. They use targeting computers that can track a tank but can't follow a fast-moving horse. They fight like we fought in the 20th century. but we've gone back to fighting like we did in the 15th. Thunder shifted beneath him, sensing the tension in the air. The other horses were becoming restless too, picking up on their riders' anticipation. "What does that mean?" Administrator Chen asked. Webb drew his plasma lance. Along the ridge, 300 other riders did the same. "It means, Administrator, that the charge lives again." He kicked Thunder into a gallop. Behind him, 300 horses surged forward. The ground shook with the thunder of their hooves, and across the battlefield the Drath looked up to see something they had never seen before, something no species in the galaxy had ever faced. The cavalry was coming! The Drath commander, a being called Vexnar, had conquered 12 worlds in his career. He had faced every type of enemy the galaxy could offer: ground forces, air forces, robotic armies, guerrilla fighters hiding in cities and jungles. He had defeated them all because he understood a fundamental truth about war. It was a matter of numbers, technology, and logistics. Emotion played no part in it. When his sensors detected the approaching cavalry, he felt a moment of genuine confusion. His tactical display showed 300 biological targets moving at high speed toward his position. The computer classified them as some kind of mounted infantry, but that made no sense. No one used mounted infantry anymore. It was an obsolete technology. "What am I looking at?" he demanded. His sensor officer studied the data. "Unknown creatures bearing organic riders. They appear to be charging directly at our formation, Commander." Vexnar made a sound of contempt. "Then destroy them. All units, concentrate fire on the approaching targets." 5,000 Drath soldiers turned their weapons toward the ridge. Hover tanks rotated their turrets. The automated defense grid locked on, and then they fired. The barrage should have been devastating. Thousands of energy bolts and kinetic rounds streaked toward the cavalry. But the horses were not running in straight lines. They weaved and dodged, their riders guiding them with subtle shifts of weight and pressure. The targeting computers tried to predict their movements, but there was nothing to predict. Every horse moved differently. Every rider made different choices. The charge was chaos given form, and chaos could not be computed. Some shots found their marks. Horses screamed and fell. Riders were thrown from their saddles, but the charge did not stop. The cavalry flowed around their fallen like water around stones, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Vexnar watched his tactical display with growing alarm. The enemy was supposed to be taking cover. They were supposed to be pinned down by his superior firepower. They were supposed to be dying in neat, predictable patterns. Instead, they were getting closer, and his soldiers were starting to waver. "Hold the line," he commanded. "They cannot possibly." The cavalry hit his front ranks like a hammer striking glass. The impact was physical and psychological at the same time. Drath soldiers who had never seen a horse suddenly found themselves face to face with creatures that weighed half a ton and were moving at 60 kilometers per hour. The horses did not slow down. They did not hesitate. They crashed through the Drath formation with the force of living battering rams. And then the plasma lances began their work. General Webb was in the center of the charge, as he had been for every charge of his career. Thunder carried him forward with the smooth power that only a true warhorse could provide. Around him, his cavalry was tearing the Drath formation apart. Energy weapons that were designed for precise, targeted fire could not cope with close-quarters combat. The Drath soldiers were trained to fight at range, and suddenly their enemy was right on top of them. A Drath soldier raised his weapon toward Webb. Thunder saw the movement before Webb did and swerved, the shot passing so close that Webb felt the heat on his face. Then he was past, his lance sweeping down to take the soldier in the back of the head. No time to think, no time to hesitate. Just movement and violence and the bond between man and horse that made them both something more than either could be alone. The first pass through the Drath formation took less than 2 minutes. The cavalry burst out the other side and immediately began to reform. Behind them, hundreds of Drath lay dead or wounded. The perfect formation that Vexnar had brought to the battlefield was now a scattered mess of confused soldiers trying to figure out what had just happened. "Again!" Webb shouted, raising his lance high. "For Earth, for the horses, charge!" Thunder wheeled around without needing to be told. The stallion knew what was expected. He had done this more times than either of them could count. The cavalry surged forward once more, 300 voices screaming their war cry. Commander Vexnar watched his army falling apart. This was not how war was supposed to work. Battles were supposed to be decided by mathematics. Superior numbers and firepower should always win. But these humans had introduced a variable that his equations could not account for. They had brought animals to the battlefield. Animals that felt no fear. Animals that loved their riders enough to run into certain death. Animals that made his soldiers feel, for the first time in their military careers, like prey. "Commander," his communications officer called. "Our forward units are routing. They're breaking formation." Vexnar saw it happening. Drath soldiers were running away, not retreating in good order, but running in panic. The cavalry was among them again, lances rising and falling, and the soldiers who had never lost a battle were fleeing like frightened children. "Order the hover tanks to fire into the melee," Vexnar commanded. "But, sir, our own troops are already lost. Kill the riders." The hover tanks opened fire with their heavy weapons. The blasts killed Drath soldiers as well as humans and horses, but Vexnar did not care. He needed to stop this charge before his entire army collapsed. A blast caught Thunder in the left flank. The stallion screamed and stumbled but did not fall. Webb felt the horse's pain as if it were his own, but there was no time to stop. He urged Thunder forward, and the brave animal obeyed, running on despite his wound. "Tanks!" Webb called out. "Form on me! We're taking the tanks!" It should have been suicide. Cavalry charging armored vehicles was the very definition of a hopeless attack. But the hover tanks were not designed for close combat. Their weapons had minimum ranges. Their sensors were overwhelmed by the dust and chaos of battle, and their crews had never faced an enemy that would ride straight at them despite certain death. The cavalry reached the tanks and swarmed over them. Riders placed explosive charges on weak points. Horses reared up and smashed their hooves against sensor arrays. One rider, Webb later learned it was Lieutenant Okonkwo, actually managed to pry open a tank hatch and throw a grenade inside. In less than 10 minutes, the entire Drath armored force was destroyed. Vexnar looked at his tactical display. His army had been cut in half. His tanks were gone. His air support was engaged with human fighters and could not intervene. And the cavalry was reforming for another charge. For the first time in his life, Vexnar felt fear. "Sound the retreat," he ordered, his voice hollow. "All forces fall back." The Drath army fled the battlefield. They left behind their dead, their wounded, and their equipment. They ran because they could not face another charge. They ran because some fundamental assumption about warfare had been shattered in their minds. They ran because the cavalry was coming. General Webb rained thunder to a halt at the top of the ridge where the charge had begun. The stallion was breathing hard, blood running from his wound, but he held his head high with pride. Around them, the surviving cavalry gathered. Of the 300 who had charged, 47 riders had fallen. 62 horses were dead or too wounded to continue. It was a heavy price. Every loss was a tragedy. But below them, the Drath army was routing and the Kelix colony was safe. "General," Captain Reyes said, riding up beside him, "should we pursue?" Webb watched the fleeing enemy for a long moment. "No, let them go. Let them tell their commanders what happened here. Let the story spread." He reached down and stroked Thunder's neck. The stallion leaned into his touch, and Webb felt the love between them, as strong as it had ever been despite the pain and exhaustion they both felt. "The best victory," Webb said, "is the one that prevents the next battle. After today, the Drath will think twice before attacking another human colony." That night, the colonists of Kelix held a celebration. They had expected to fight and die defending their homes. Instead, the cavalry had saved them without a single civilian casualty. Administrator Chen personally thanked every rider and insisted on meeting every horse. But the riders did not celebrate for long. There was too much work to do. Wounded horses needed care. Fallen comrades needed burial. Equipment needed repair. And Thunder needed attention for his wound. Webb sat with his horse in the stable that had been hastily constructed for the cavalry. A veterinarian had treated Thunder's injury and said he would recover, but the stallion needed rest. Webb refused to leave his side. "You did good today, old friend," he said, stroking Thunder's mane. "You always do good." Thunder nudged Webb's shoulder with his nose. The gesture needed no translation. Captain Reyes found them there an hour later. "General, we've received a message from Earth Command. The Galactic Council has requested a formal presentation on human cavalry tactics." Webb laughed softly. "They want to understand how animals can beat their technology. Can you explain it to them?" Webb looked at Thunder, at the scars and the wounds and the spirit that had never broken in 15 years of war. "No," he said, "I can tell them facts and figures. I can show them battle recordings. I can explain training methods and tactical doctrine, but I can't explain what it means to love a horse, to trust another being with your life and have that trust returned completely. That's not something you can teach with words." Reyes nodded. He understood. Every rider understood. It was the great mystery at the heart of what they did. How did an ancient partnership between two species become the most effective military force in the galaxy? The answer was simple and complex at the same time. They fought harder because they loved deeper. The Galactic Council chamber was the largest enclosed space ambassador Sarah Chen had ever seen. Thousands of representatives from hundreds of species filled the tiered seating, all of them focused on the holographic display in the center of the room. On that display, recordings from the Battle of Kelix played in crystal-clear detail. Chen stood at the speaking platform, watching the alien faces as they watched the cavalry charge. She saw confusion, disbelief, and in some cases what she thought might be fear. Good, fear was useful. Fear would keep human colonies safe. "As you can see," she said when the recording finished, "the cavalry forces of the United Earth Federation are highly effective against conventional military formations. Our current doctrine calls for cavalry units to be deployed alongside traditional forces, using their speed and shock value to disrupt enemy formations, while heavier units exploit the openings created." A Krix ambassador raised one of its manipulator limbs. "Ambassador Chen, we have analyzed your cavalry tactics extensively. Our military experts believe we have identified several countermeasures that would be effective against mounted forces." Chen smiled. "I'm sure you have. And I'm sure your countermeasures would work exactly as designed in a training exercise. But Ambassador, let me tell you what happens when your soldiers face a cavalry charge for real." She touched a control, and the display changed to show footage from Drath helmet cameras captured during the Battle of Kelix. The images were chaotic, terrifying, horses looming out of the dust, lances glowing with plasma energy, riders screaming war cries that the translators rendered as pure noise, and everywhere the sound of hooves like thunder that never stopped. "Your countermeasures assume your soldiers will stand their ground," Chen continued. "They assume your targeting systems will function correctly despite the dust and confusion. They assume your troops will maintain fire discipline when facing creatures twice their size moving at speed. But what actually happens is this. The recording showed Drath soldiers breaking and running. Their formations collapsed. Their carefully planned defensive positions abandoned. Their sophisticated weapons unused because the soldiers holding them had already fled. Psychological warfare, she said. That is what cavalry truly is. We are not bringing horses to the battlefield because they are the most efficient killing machines. We are bringing them because they terrify you, because they remind you that you are mortal, because when you see them coming, some ancient part of your brain tells you to run. The chamber was silent. Chen let the silence stretch, let the aliens absorb what she had told them. Finally, the Vorn ambassador spoke. You are saying that your horses are a weapon of fear. I am saying that war is not just about killing your enemies. It is about breaking their will to fight. A cavalry charge does both at the same time. And unlike your weapons, Ambassador, ours cannot be countered with better technology. You cannot build a machine that makes your soldiers brave. You cannot program software to eliminate their survival instincts. The only defense against what we do is to train your soldiers to face their fears, and that takes years, decades, generations. She paused, looking around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces. Humanity has been training for this since the first human climbed onto the first horse. We have had 5,000 years to perfect the partnership between rider and mount. You have had 5 years since you first encountered us. You are not ready. And if you attack our colonies, our cavalry will show you just how unready you are. The message was delivered. Chen stepped back from the platform and returned to her seat. Around her, the Galactic Council erupted into discussion, but she barely heard it. Her job was done. She had shown them what humanity could do. Now they would have to decide how to respond. 2 weeks later, Chen received word that the hegemony of Drath had signed a non-aggression treaty with the United Earth Federation. The Scrath had withdrawn from 3 disputed systems, and a dozen other species had sent diplomatic overtures expressing interest in peaceful relations. Fear was useful indeed. Back on Earth, General Marcus Webb received the news while recovering from his wounds in a military hospital. Thunder was in the stable nearby, healing from his own injuries, and the doctors had given up trying to keep Webb in his bed. He spent most of his time with his horse, just as he always had. "We won," Captain Reyes told him, holding up a data pad with the treaty information. The Drath backed down. No more attacks on human colonies. Webb nodded slowly. "Good, that's good. You don't seem happy." Webb reached out to stroke Thunder's neck. The stallion pressed into his hand, seeking the comfort of his rider's touch. "I'm happy that people won't die, but I'm thinking about what comes next. We've shown the galaxy what cavalry can do. Now everyone will be trying to counter it." "Let them try," Reyes said. "We'll adapt. We always have." That was true. The cavalry had adapted from ancient warfare to medieval combat to modern battlefields. They had gone from carrying swords to carrying plasma lances. They had gone from Earth to the stars. Every time someone declared that cavalry was obsolete, they found a way to prove them wrong. "You know what the real secret is?" Webb asked. "It's not the speed or the shock value or even the fear. It's the horses themselves. They want to charge. They want to fight alongside their riders. They feel what we feel, and they choose to face death with us anyway. You can't replicate that with machines. You can't buy it with money. You can only earn it with love." Thunder snorted softly, as if agreeing. Reyes smiled. "Speaking of which, the breeding program on Luna reports that Thunder's latest foal is showing exceptional promise. They want to name her Storm." Webb felt a warmth in his chest. Thunder was getting old. In a few more years, he would be too old to charge, but his legacy would continue. His children would carry new riders into new battles on new worlds. The line would go on. Storm, he repeated. I like that. He looked at Thunder, at this animal who had been his partner and friend for so long. They had grown old together, scarred and worn by years of war, but they were still here, still fighting, still ready to charge one more time if the call came. The cavalry will never die, Webb said, because as long as there are humans and horses, there will be people willing to ride together into the unknown. People who love each other enough to face anything. That's what they don't understand. That's what they'll never understand. Thunder nudged his shoulder again, and Webb laughed. Yeah, old friend. You understand. You always did. Outside the hospital window, the stars were shining. Somewhere out there, human cavalry units were patrolling, training, preparing for whatever challenge came next. The charge would live forever, not because of tactics or technology, but because of love. And that was something no alien species would ever be able to defeat. 50 years had passed since the Battle of Kelix. General Marcus Webb was long dead, buried with full military honors on Earth beside his beloved Thunder. But his legacy lived on in ways he never could have imagined. Colonel Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the UES Spirit of Thunder, the newest and most advanced cavalry transport in the human fleet. Through the viewport, she could see the planet below. Xenos Prime, homeworld of the Collective, a species that had been at war with humanity for 3 decades. Today, that war would end. All cavalry units report ready, Colonel, her aide said. 4,000 riders, 4,000 horses. The largest cavalry force ever assembled. Santos nodded. 4,000, 5 times what Webb had commanded at Kelix. The cavalry had grown in the decades since, becoming the elite force of the United Earth military. Every child on Earth knew the stories. Every young person dreamed of riding with the cavalry. Her own horse, a gray mare named Cloud, who was descended from Thunder himself, waited in the stable below. Santos had ridden Cloud for 12 years, through 5 campaigns and countless battles. They knew each other as well as any 2 beings could. The Collective has requested terms of surrender, her aide continued. They're asking for a ceasefire while negotiations proceed. Denied, Santos said. We tried negotiating for 30 years. They killed millions of our people, destroyed dozens of our colonies. Now they see 4,000 horses in orbit and suddenly they want peace. She shook her head. No, we're going to show them exactly what they've been fighting against. The drop began an hour later. 4,000 horses in specialized drop pods falling toward the surface of an alien world. Santos was in the lead pod with Cloud, feeling the familiar vibration of atmospheric entry. The mare was calm, as she always was before a charge. She trusted her rider completely. When the pod doors opened, Santos was in the saddle before the restraints finished releasing. Cloud burst out onto the alien soil, her hooves finding solid ground, her muscles ready for what came next. Around them, thousands of other horses were doing the same, their riders forming up in the patterns they had practiced countless times. The collective capital lay before them. a city of glass and metal, home to billions of aliens who had never seen a horse in person. Their defensive forces were assembled at the city's edge, but they were not shooting. They were watching. Santos raised her lance. 4,000 other lances rose in response. "Today we end this war," she shouted, her voice carried across the battlefield by her suit's amplifiers. "Today we show them what humanity has always known, that love is stronger than hate, that courage is stronger than fear, that the bond between a rider and their horse can conquer any enemy." She kicked Cloud into a gallop. Behind her, 4,000 horses surged forward. The ground shook with the thunder of their hooves. The air filled with the sound of their war cry. The collective soldiers dropped their weapons and ran. They had heard the stories. Everyone in the galaxy had heard the stories by now. The humans and their horses charging together into certain death and emerging victorious. The partnership that no technology could match. The love that no weapon could defeat. And now they were seeing it in person. 4,000 horses streaming across the plains toward their city. 4,000 riders screaming their defiance at the universe. An ancient alliance brought forward through thousands of years and millions of kilometers to prove one simple truth. The cavalry charge would live forever. Santos did not slow down as she passed the abandoned defensive positions. She did not stop to accept the collective surrender. She rode through their streets, past their homes, past their citizens who stared in wonder and terror at the creatures they had only seen in battle recordings. She rode until she reached the grand hall where the collective's leadership waited. There, finally, she stopped. Cloud was breathing hard, her flanks heaving, but her head was held high with pride. Santos dismounted and walked up the steps of the hall, her boots ringing on the alien stone. The collective's supreme leader was waiting at the top. A being of many limbs and many eyes, ancient beyond human understanding. It had led the war against humanity for 3 decades. Now it watched as a single human woman approached, a horse standing patiently behind her. "You have defeated us," the supreme leader said. Its translator rendered the words without emotion, but Santos thought she heard something like respect in them. "But I do not understand how. Our technology is superior. Our numbers are greater. How can animals defeat machines?" Santos turned and looked at Cloud. The mare walked forward until she was standing beside her rider, her shoulder pressed against Santos' arm. The touch was warm and familiar and full of meaning. "They're not just animals," Santos said. "They're our partners, our friends, our family. We fight for each other not because we're ordered to, but because we love each other. That's something you never understood. That's something you can't defeat." The supreme leader was silent for a long moment. Then it bowed its many limbs in a gesture of submission. "The collective surrenders to the United Earth Federation. The war is over." Santos nodded. "The war is over, and now the real work begins. Learning to live together, learning to understand each other, maybe even learning what it means to love something enough to die for it." She mounted Cloud and rode back through the city, past the watching aliens, past her cavalry who were accepting the formal surrender of the collective forces. The war was over. Millions of lives had been saved. And it had happened because humans had never forgotten the partnership that had carried them through 5,000 years of history. That night, Santos sat with Cloud in a stable hastily constructed in the shadow of the collective's greatest monument. The mare was tired but content, eating her grain and enjoying the attention of her rider. "We did it, girl," Santos said, stroking Cloud's neck. "We really did it." Cloud nudged her shoulder, the same gesture that horses had been making to their humans since the first wild stallion allowed itself to be tamed. It meant trust. It meant affection. It meant partnership. Santos thought about General Webb and Thunder, about all the riders and horses who had come before. They had all believed in something that seemed impossible. They had all been willing to charge into the unknown because they trusted the creature beneath them. And now that trust had helped end a war and save 2 species from mutual destruction. The cavalry charge would live forever, not because of military doctrine or tactical advantage, but because of love. The love between a rider and their horse. The love that made both of them braver, stronger, better than either could be alone. It was, Santos thought, the most human thing imaginable. And as long as there were humans in the universe, the horses would be there beside them. Partners, friends, family, charging into the future, together, forever,